When the princess protected a human prince, the galaxy took sides. Delegates from 100 worlds floated in ordered lanes of air, their robes, shells, and glimmering limbs moving in slow, careful ritual. Each face in the ring showed a different measure of power, some smooth and unmarked, some lined with age like the bark of an old tree, some studded with bioluminescent marks that pulsed with feeling. In the center of the hall, under a dome of clear alloy, sat a raised platform meant for the speakers, for treaties, for the slow exchange of favors that kept empires from breaking. The human prince stood at the edge of that circle and felt very small. He was young, barely 27 by Earth reckoning. He did not wear the heavy armor or the jeweled insignias that many expected of royalty. His clothes were simple, a plain dark jacket, a shirt with a small collar, and boots that had walked through dust on more than one border world. He had not come to impress with show, but to speak plainly. That, he thought, would be his strength. That and a stubborn belief that people could be argued into better choices. Around him, murmurs rose like insects. Humans were new to the inner circles of power. Earth had once been an old rumor, a blue planet on the edge of maps. In a few short decades, humanity had tied its scattered colonies into one voice. The sight of a human royal among established houses was both a curiosity and a challenge. Many of the delegates found it hard to believe that such a young species could now take a place at the table. Across the hall, the alien princess watched. She sat in a carved seat that shimmered with living vines, an heir to 1,000 systems whose name carried the slow music of old dynasties. Her skin caught light like polished stone, and her eyes were slits that saw too much. She had been raised in chambers where alliances were measured in generations. She knew ceremonies. She knew threats. Yet there was something in the way the human moved that kept her attention. He did not bow or preen. He kept his hands at his sides as if he trusted his words more than status. The summit had been called by her house. The purpose was simple on paper: to discuss the new routes of trade through the rift and to set boundaries for mining claimants. In truth, it was a test. The empire needed to show strength. The conservative noble houses needed to be reminded of power. Rivals needed to be placated with open debate. A human presence offered a fresh distraction, a tool to be used by anyone who wished to spin sympathy or outrage. For 2 days the talks wound like a slow river. Speeches were made in languages with clicks and sonar, in chords of light projected across the air, and in a careful human translator who tried to match tone with every phrase. The human prince listened more than he spoke. He watched patterns in the protocol. He noticed where the delegates looked away from each other when someone mentioned old debts. He paid attention to the small things: the sound of a mineral council claiming sovereignty, the way a trade guild kept its agent near the lifts. His mind was not full of pride. It was full of questions. The first sign of trouble was an almost invisible tremor underfoot. The hall's air systems hummed and something flickered along the ring of screens. Lights stuttered. A whispered alarm ran through the staff. Protocols kicked into motion. Security drones moved through the aisles. False roofs snapped into place, and a cold voice over the hall speakers told everyone to remain calm. "Power grid fluctuation," said one of the elder delegates, his throat making a sound that humans understood as a laugh. "Faulty maintenance. Old ships are always—" Then the dome cracked. Glass did not break in a simple way inside a ship. The dome had been designed to flex under stress and to seal against loss, but the crack spread like a black vein. Air shuddered. The lights flared and then dropped to a pale emergency glow. For a moment, the room filled with the smell of scorched circuits and alien ozone. A ripple of fear went through the gathered worlds. What followed was not accident. A series of devices had been placed along the structural ribs of the dome. They were small, camouflaged, and humming with a disruptive frequency. That frequency attacked the dome's integrity and the control matrix that kept the ship stable. Whoever had set it up knew ancient engineering and modern sabotage. The first blast had come from outside, from a ship that should not have been in range. The second was inside, in the air duct above the translator pod. Panic, practiced or raw, is a terrible thing to watch. Some delegates folded into their ritual positions and tried to hide fear with ceremony. Others bolted for the lifts. Security moved like a slow tide, but the saboteurs had thought of that. The emergency lift stalled. Doors jammed. A current of smoke and scentless gas began to creep along the lower aisles. It clouded vision and made breathing hot and heavy. Inside the translator pod, a human mechanic froze on his hands and knees. His fingers went to a small gadget at his belt, an earth tool, a pocket device built from old-school circuitry and some flexible graphene. He knelt and worked. To a human, it looked like fiddling. To any trained officer, it looked like hope. The device had a light that blinked like a heartbeat. It hummed. It made little clicks that sounded like an old person counting coins. Around him, the air grew hotter. The dome's crack widened. The human prince saw that. He saw the mechanic's hands. He saw the device. He did not think of his status then. He thought of the thousands of lives in the hall and of the human crew who had always fixed what machines broke. He moved. He moved with the quick, awkward grace of someone who had run across a dozen worlds. He navigated past frozen delegates, past a falling screen that burned a shallow stripe across a noble's sleeve. Someone shouted. The prince ignored the shout. He reached the pod and knelt beside the mechanic. "Give me the panel," he said. His voice cut through panic because it was simple and clear. The mechanic handed over the broken trim. The prince's fingers were not trained for alien machines. He had practiced on old ship models and on broken radios in Earth garages. He fit connectors together the way a musician fits notes. Where the frequencies fought against each other, he layered a counter-pulse with the palm of his hand. A human intuition learned from crowds and traffic and fixing 1,000 everyday problems without a manual. The device made a sick, high whine. A sliver of light traced the crack and the sound of stress eased. Around the dome, spots of the outer labyrinth began to pulse as the ship's emergency matrix tried to reconcile with the intrusion. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the dome's crack halted. The stuttering light steadied. The lift stuttered but responded. The smoke thinned. For that small success, a cheer rose, not the refined applause of the summit room, but raw, relieved exhalation. The prince smiled, both from relief and from something much deeper, the proof that a hand could solve what was made to harm. Around him, many saw only the human detail, a young royal bending to help a mechanic. Some saw far more. Not everyone could accept that the crisis had been solved by an outsider. In the shadowed ranks of the nobility, there were men and women who had prepared for this moment. They had not wanted the summit to go smoothly. They had wanted a scandal, a reason to push the human influence out or to seize the throne while the empire fussed. Among them a voice rose sharp and cold. "Sabotage," the voice said. "This is proof that they cannot be trusted. Words have power where they are believed." The accusation spread like oil. Some faces folded into suspicion. Fingers pointed. Security remembered the ancient rule. Any act of sabotage must be punished, and punishment required a clear target. The human prince, young, visible, and now intimately involved in the failure and the fix, was an easy focus. He had touched the ship's systems. He had moved inside the ring. He had been close to the open dome. A quick mind could weave a story of culpability. A senior marshal moved forward, his armor dented from service and his crest a badge of many campaigns. He did not ask questions. Procedure is a religion in halls like that. He shouted the words that made flags fall and chairs tilt. "Arrest the outsider. Detain all human affiliates until the inquiry." The marshal's command was not only a lawless echo of fear, it was a test. The marshal expected obedience. He expected the princess, whose seat was carved and crowned by ancestral law, to nod and let the protocol take hold. He expected the spectacle of a human prince led away in shackles to be the final chord before a long political tune. The princess did not nod. She rose from her seat with the slow, calm movement of someone who has learned the value of silence. Her robes flowed like a river, they carried the scent of living gardens. She walked through the smoke toward the scene. Her walk was measured and deliberate. Delegates parted, not from fear but from the force of her choice. The marshal's face hardened as she approached. He raised a hand as if to remind her of the code of the rules that bound rulers to ritual. "You will not take him," the princess said. Her voice was not loud, but it had the iron in it of an order. She stood before the prince. She placed herself between him and the marshal. The effect was nearly theatrical, an air of a great empire shielding a human in the middle of a threatened summit. It was the sort of image that would feed weeks of debate and 100 different histories. Some smiled, some scowled. The marshal barked the code and pointed to his badge. "Royalty is not above inquiry," he said. "Not when inquiry is a weapon," the princess replied. Her eyes met the marshal's and did not blink. "Not here, not now." She did not offer reasons. She did not explain her loyalty. She only moved her body and her stance so that anyone who wished to arrest the prince would have to strike her first. In doing so, she chose a collision with history rather than a quiet compliance with it. There was a sound in the hall then, the sound of a world holding its breath. The staff quieted. The matrix of the ship hummed with the delicate balance of processes. The delegates looked from face to face, trying to read the old rules and the new pain. Cameras in the hall, a mesh of lenses, some ancient, some new, caught the moment and fed it to the waiting networks outside the ship. Messages began to travel, first slow, then very fast. Across systems, across trade lanes, across small settlements and great courts, the image of a princess shielding a human prince spread like a spark. In some places, the spark was a blessing. In others, it was a threat. The noble houses that had always feared a change in power called for investigation. They pointed to the prince's fingerprints on the panel and the ease with which human tools had fixed the dome. They whispered of human cunning and of plots to seize the rift's resources. In other quarters, among merchants, mechanics, miners, and the anonymous citizens of a dozen systems, the image was proof of something better. Here was a princess who would stand for a stranger. Here was a human who had not bowed to fear. They saw an alliance of courage. For the prince, the moment was heavy. He felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. He felt that, with one young choice, kneeling to help a stranger, he had become a symbol. He had not wished for that. He had only moved to save lives, yet symbols do not ask permission. They grow. He looked at the princess and, for the first time that week, failed to find words that fit. He said instead, simply, "Thank you." The princess only inclined her head. For her, the act had not been a performance. It had been a measure of trust extended into a dangerous room. Yet she knew the world she lived in. She knew what the marshal's men would do if she let the story be the marshal's story. She also knew what stories could change. Sometimes a single image could reroute alliances and make old enemies wary of dampened greed. Outside the summit, the news went like a current. In the marketplaces of 3 systems, in the quiet halls of governors far from the rift, people watched the feed and whispered. A poet in a coastal city wrote lines about the new age of courage. A small faction of rebels saw an opportunity. A merchant lord considered who would control the rift's trade if the empire's course shifted. A veteran captain remembered the way courage had turned tides once before, in a skirmish at the edge of the Orion chain. Inside the hall, the immediate tension changed shape. The marshal did not strike. He could not. The law allowed a ruler the right to protect a guest, and in front of every camera he would have seemed the aggressor striking at tradition. He hissed through his teeth and took his men back a step. Yet he did not retreat entirely. He filed the record. He sent inquiries through official channels. He would not let the matter rest. The The summit would continue, but not as planned. Diplomacy had become theater. Each speech that followed bore the shadow of the dome's crack and the image of two unlikely allies. The human prince watched the faces of those around him. He had stepped into a larger world than he had expected. He had also stepped into danger. For now, the princess's choice had transformed him from a curiosity into a cause. That was not all bad. It also meant that the eyes of the galaxy would see his actions as proof, not just as gesture. When the summit resumed, people moved with a different rhythm. Some watched with old caution. Others watched with new hope. The rift's map glowed on the central screen, lines like silver rivers. For the prince, for the princess, for the mechanic with soot on his hands, and for the marshal with laws on his tongue, the summit would no longer be about trade routes and taxes. It would be about what a single act could call into being: alliances, rumors, tests of courage, and perhaps a slow rearrangement of power. Outside the ship, the stars turned as always, indifferent and patient. Inside, a new story had been lit. It would travel far, it would pick up allies and enemies, and it would not end neatly. But for one bright crack of time, a princess had stood between law and violence, and a human had reached into the heart of a machine and found a way to mend it. The galaxy, which loved to choose sides, had begun to listen. The aftermath of the summit rippled through the galaxy faster than any diplomat had predicted. The image of the alien princess shielding the human prince from the marshal's authority spread from world to world, carried by transmissions, whispers, and the quiet hum of communication nets. Some systems celebrated, seeing in it a symbol of courage, trust, and fairness. Others recoiled, fearing that the presence of humans might disrupt the careful balance of power that had held for centuries. Alliances began to shift like sand under an unseen tide. The human prince did not yet understand the full weight of his new status. He had not come to the summit seeking fame or influence. He had come to represent humanity with honesty and clarity. And now, because of one act of courage by the princess, he had become a symbol, a rallying point for those who wanted change and a target for those who preferred the old order. His nights were restless, spent thinking not of diplomacy, but of survival. The princess, meanwhile, felt the pressures of her choice as acutely as he did. Her advisors, noble houses, and family council had begun to whisper, some openly, some in hushed tones behind screens. "He is human," they said. "You cannot trust him. You place our empire at risk." But she knew better. She had seen what the human had done with the panel, how he had calmly repaired a system that threatened thousands of lives. Courage, ingenuity, and calm under pressure, these were qualities that mattered more than heritage alone. And in protecting him, she had not only saved a life, but also signaled her willingness to embrace new possibilities. The first real test came within a week. A secret coalition, composed of conservative noble houses and distant governors who saw the human as a threat, began to plan. They intended not just to question the prince's actions, but to remove him entirely from the political stage. Their network spread rumors, claiming sabotage had been intentional, hinting that humanity was not to be trusted. They whispered that the princess's loyalty was misplaced, painting her as weak, foolish, or even complicit. The prince received his first warning in a small, understated way. A message arrived on his personal communicator, a device of human design but alien encryption, showing coordinates far from the capital. The message was simple: do not trust the security detail in the southern wing. They are not all who they seem. He looked up from the screen to see the princess standing behind him, her eyes steady. "I received the same," she said. "We will not be trapped by shadows." Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We leave tonight." The prince nodded. For the first time, he realized that survival in this environment required the same qualities he had relied on at the summit: observation, quick thinking, and trust in the few allies who had proven themselves. He had never imagined fleeing from a palace would become part of diplomacy, yet here it was. Under the cover of darkness they moved. The palace corridors, usually filled with protocol officers and ceremonial guards, were empty, or more precisely, selectively empty. Some doors led to silent chambers, others to dead ends meant to confuse intruders. The princess guided him, not with maps but with instinct honed over years of navigating court intrigue. She knew which paths led to surveillance blind spots, which lifts could be overridden, and which guards would hesitate out of loyalty rather than obedience. The human prince followed closely, feeling the weight of his vulnerability, yet also the strange exhilaration of agency. For once, he was not a figurehead. He was not merely a symbol of humanity. He was an active participant in survival, using the skills that made his species unique. When a security drone passed a corridor faster than expected, he calculated its speed, timing, and trajectory, moving in perfect coordination with the princess's signals. Together, they evaded capture by inches, hearts pounding, yet their coordination was seamless. Outside, the human-built stealth cruiser waited in the shadows of the orbital docks. It was a modest ship, smaller than most in the Imperial fleet, but it had advantages: speed, agility, and a system designed for unexpected maneuvers. The prince had studied it briefly during his earlier journey, noting its human design and efficiency. Now it became their lifeline. As they approached the ship, the coalition's first strike came. Alarms blared from the docks. Automated turrets activated, their weapons calibrated for intruders. Patrol drones spun into the air, scanning for heat signatures and energy readings. The princess did not hesitate. She pressed a series of controls on her wrist console, signaling the hidden defenses of the cruiser. Energy shields hummed, raising a translucent barrier that deflected initial fire. The prince climbed aboard, coordinating with the pilot, a human engineer who had designed the ship with improvisation in mind. The first jump out of the system was tense. Sensors detected multiple pursuit crafts, faster and more powerful than their small ship, but the prince's quick thinking kept them alive. He noticed the blind spots in the enemy ships, tracking algorithms, subtle delays in the targeting network. "Follow my lead," he said, pointing to a gap in the asteroid belt's sensor coverage. The pilot nodded and they slipped through, moving from one shadow to another. Once in deep space, the human prince realized something significant. The galaxy had begun to take sides. Not all factions were hostile. Some worlds, neutral or sympathetic, had already begun transmitting aid and intelligence. Traders offered supplies through clandestine channels, and intelligence networks provided warnings of ambushes. The human prince saw a network forming, not directed by protocol or tradition, but by admiration and hope. Humanity's influence was spreading quietly but rapidly, and he was at the center of it. Meanwhile, the princess coordinated her own contacts. She was not powerless, even in flight. Her communications were secure, encrypted with algorithms that even the coalition could not break. Messages went out to loyal fleets, informing them of the betrayal, outlining potential threats, and requesting support. She balanced diplomacy with urgency, recognizing that her actions now carried consequences for both herself and the human prince. During the journey, the prince and the princess spoke little at first, but the silence was not uncomfortable. The prince observed her calm precision, the way she managed stress without panic. He had seen courage before, but her courage was a quiet, commanding force, the kind that shaped events without noise. He began to understand why her decisions mattered, why her protection of him at the summit had changed the political landscape. After several hours in relative safety, the prince spoke. "Why me?" he asked. "Why protect someone like me when your advisors, your empire, all of this?" He gestured to the stars around them. "Say it's a mistake." The princess did not answer immediately. She studied the controls, checked their trajectory, and then looked at him with eyes that held centuries of inherited wisdom. "Because you acted with honesty," she said. "Because you did not bow to fear or ceremony. You did not trick or cheat. You helped where you could, simply because it was right. That is rare in any species, human or alien." The prince felt a warmth in his chest, a mix of relief and understanding. He had not thought of his actions as extraordinary. They had been simple, almost instinctive, help where help is needed. And yet, in a galaxy accustomed to power plays, that simplicity became revolutionary. Their journey continued through uncharted sectors. The coalition's reach was extensive, but the human prince's ingenuity and the princess's knowledge of political and physical systems allowed them to stay ahead. Along the way, they encountered allies who had been inspired by the summit's events. Some were minor, merchants who offered fuel and supplies. Others were major, commanders who provided ships, pilots, and strategic advice. Humanity's reputation grew not through fear, but through demonstration of skill, courage, and cleverness. During one tense encounter near the edge of a binary star system, they were intercepted by a squadron sent by the coalition. The enemy ships outnumbered them and had superior firepower. Most would have panicked. Most would have expected to be captured or destroyed. The princess assessed the situation calmly, but it was the human prince who proposed a solution. He analyzed the gravitational patterns of the twin stars and suggested a trajectory that would swing them in an unexpected orbit, using the stars' gravity to slingshot past the enemy. The maneuver was risky. Even a small miscalculation could spell disaster. Yet it was uniquely human in its audacity and flexibility. With precise timing, the princess executed the plan. The cruiser darted through the system like a silver arrow, weaving past sensors and weapons fire, emerging unscathed on the other side. That night, after the immediate danger had passed, the princess finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. She looked at the human prince, who was quietly observing the stars outside the viewport. "You have done something remarkable," she said softly. "Not just surviving, but teaching even me that rules are not always absolute. Sometimes the right choice is not the obvious one." The prince shook his head, a smile on his lips. "I've only done what humans do every day. We face problems with what we have, make choices, and hope for the best. Sometimes it works, sometimes it fails. We just keep going." She considered this and realized that humanity's strength lay not in weapons, fleets, or technology alone. It lay in adaptability, ingenuity, and the ability to act under uncertainty, traits that many alien societies had once overlooked or underestimated. As they continued their flight, the coalition's efforts to isolate them became more frantic. Reports of their survival and small victories circulated widely, inspiring supporters and unnerving enemies. The galaxy was no longer indifferent to humanity. The human prince, once merely a symbol of diplomatic courtesy, had become a figure whose presence demanded attention, whose actions shifted alliances, and whose ideas challenged centuries of tradition. The princess watched him and felt a surge of certainty. She had chosen correctly in protecting him, but she also understood the path ahead would be dangerous. Every move now required thought, strategy, and courage. Their flight was not just a matter of survival. It was the beginning of a larger story, one that would shape alliances, provoke envy, and perhaps even ignite change across the stars. Together, they moved through the dark expanse, two figures bound not by protocol or convenience, but by choice, trust, and the unspoken understanding that in a galaxy full of power and fear, a single act of courage could ripple farther than anyone could imagine. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time humanity was not a footnote, it was a force. The galaxy was no longer neutral. Every system, every fleet, every merchant house had begun to form opinions, alliances, and judgments about the human prince and the alien princess. Some supported them quietly at first, offering information, supplies, or safe routes through dangerous sectors. Others sought to trap them, to show that daring defiance would be punished. In this tense balance, every move mattered, and every mistake could be fatal. The human prince sat in the control room of the cruiser, staring at the array of screens that showed star systems, patrol routes, and the distant glimmer of the rift. His mind, which had been trained for diplomacy and negotiation, now turned to survival, tactics, and rapid decision-making. He had learned in the last few days that speed, observation, and creativity were as valuable as formal knowledge. In moments of danger, he found that instinct, logic, and courage combined to give him an edge that even the most experienced alien commanders sometimes lacked. The princess moved beside him, calm and deliberate. Her hands worked controls with precision, her eyes flicking from one monitor to another, analyzing information faster than most could process words. Yet she allowed the prince to speak, to propose maneuvers, to suggest paths through space. She trusted him. That trust, rare in a galaxy ruled by protocol and hierarchy, had begun to shape events in ways no one could have predicted. Their first challenge of the day came without warning. Long-range sensors detected a fleet approaching, faster than any human or alien ship the prince had studied. They were outnumbered, their cruiser small and lightly armed compared to the squadron closing in. The prince leaned forward, his eyes scanning the patterns on the screen. He had to think quickly. "They're not just coming at us directly," he said. "They're trying to herd us toward the asteroid belt. Look at their angles, the way their approach vectors converge. They want to trap us." The princess studied the screen. "Then we won't follow their path. What do you suggest?" He pointed to a small cluster of uncharted debris fields beyond the belt. "We can use that. Their sensors will be disrupted. We can weave through and maybe even ambush if necessary. But timing is everything. If we miscalculate, we'll be crushed." The princess nodded. "Do it." The cruiser moved with precision, banking and twisting through the debris field, shields humming as tiny fragments of rock bounced off. Sensors flashed warnings of collisions, but the prince guided the pilot, calling out angles and distances in rapid succession. Every instinct he had learned from years of human problem-solving, games, strategy, improvisation, was now in use on a life-or-death scale. The enemy fleet followed, slower and less adaptable, their formation struggling to adjust to the unpredictable movements of the cruiser. At one point, a large frigate clipped an asteroid, its shields flaring and alarms blaring. Another tried to follow directly and found itself entangled in gravitational interference from a larger mass. The prince and the princess worked in perfect tandem, one providing strategy, the other executing with skill honed by experience and command. By the time they emerged from the debris, the enemy fleet had lost formation and several ships had retreated. The princess allowed herself a brief smile. "You think like a tactician, not a prince," she said. The human prince shrugged. "I've had to think fast all my life. We humans survive by adapting. Rules are often optional if survival is at stake." The momentary victory brought relief, but it was not lasting. News arrived through encrypted channels that other factions had mobilized. Eager to take advantage of the attention the human prince and the princess were drawing. These were not random attacks. They were coordinated attempts to isolate, weaken, and perhaps destroy them. Every system they passed seemed to hold spies, mercenaries, or politicians eager to exploit a moment of weakness. They landed on a neutral trading world for supplies, a planet filled with floating cities tethered to the surface by massive cables. The streets were crowded with merchants from countless species, some human, some alien, some difficult to categorize at all. Here they were safer, but only if they remained discreet. The prince observed quietly, noting which traders were likely allies and which might report them to the coalition. In the market, the prince demonstrated another strength of humanity, empathy, and communication. He spoke plainly with traders, showing respect for their concerns, listening carefully, and responding with clarity. Even in a crowd filled with wary eyes, he managed to gather critical information about the coalition's movements, learning which ships had left ports, which patrols were active, and which safe routes remained. The princess watched with quiet admiration. "Your approach is remarkable, diplomacy, observation, and trust all at once," he shrugged again. "It's what humans do. We build networks sometimes invisible, and we use what we learn. Not everyone notices, but the results speak eventually." Their respite was short-lived. Scouts from the coalition had tracked them, and a rapid strike was imminent. A small fleet arrived in orbit, weapons primed, scanners searching. The princess made a decision that would again test both of them. They would not flee. Instead, they would engage strategically, using the environment and their ingenuity to turn the tables. The human prince studied the orbital maps, noting patterns in the enemy fleet's movement. "They're overconfident. They assume our ship is slow and weak. But if we can manipulate the gravity of the planet and its moons, we can create a trap." He quickly calculated trajectories, suggested diversion routes, and coordinated with the princess and the pilot. The cruiser moved like a living creature, weaving through gravitational pockets, using reflected energy bursts to confuse sensors, and exploiting blind spots in the enemy's formation. The coalition ships were outmaneuvered, their attacks scattered and ineffective. The success was not just tactical, it was symbolic. Word of the human prince's ingenuity, coupled with the princess's leadership, spread quickly. Neutral systems began to take sides, seeing that the duo was capable not only of survival, but of turning disadvantages into victories. Allies became bolder, offering ships, intelligence, and logistical support. Opposition grew wary, knowing that brute force alone would not prevail. During a quiet moment after the skirmish, the prince and the princess sat in the cruiser's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The prince reflected on how far they had come in just a few days. He had started the summit as an outsider, underestimated and nearly dismissed. Now he was central to a network of loyalty and support that spanned dozens of systems. It was both exhilarating and exhausting. "You've changed the galaxy without firing a single traditional weapon," he said. The princess smiled faintly. "You and I together, yes. But it is not just us. Every action we take inspires others. Courage is contagious, even in a galaxy ruled by fear and politics." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Humanity's strengths, adaptability, creativity, and determination had become tools that shaped events far beyond his original intentions. Every small victory, every clever maneuver, every act of calm reasoning was building a reputation that could not be ignored. Yet even as they celebrated, danger remained. The coalition was relentless. They had lost minor skirmishes, but they were not defeated. They had resources, fleets, and political influence, and they were prepared to exploit any error. The human prince and the princess knew that their success so far was only the beginning. Every choice now could have consequences that rippled across the galaxy. One night, as they traveled through a quiet sector near a system of uninhabited planets, the prince noticed a pattern in the coalition's communications, a subtle frequency hidden beneath routine transmissions. He leaned over the console, analyzing it with a keen eye. "They're coordinating. There's a larger force moving, something we haven't seen yet. They're preparing for a major strike." The princess looked over his shoulder, her expression calm but alert. "Then we must be ready. We cannot wait for them to dictate the terms." The next days were filled with preparation. The human prince used his knowledge of tactics, improvisation, and strategy to anticipate potential threats. He designed diversions, suggested patrols, and coordinated with allies in ways that combined human ingenuity with alien technology. Each action was deliberate, aimed at strengthening their position, and forcing the coalition to react rather than act. When the strike finally came, it was larger than expected. Several squadrons moved in formation, their sensors sharp, their weapons primed. The cruiser and its allies faced overwhelming odds. But the human prince remained calm, analyzing every possibility, predicting every move, and adjusting tactics in real time. The princess executed his plans flawlessly, her leadership ensuring that every ally was coordinated, every maneuver precise. The battle was intense, a blur of motion, light, and sound. Ships twisted through space, shields flared, and weapons discharged in bursts of energy. Yet the human prince's calculations, combined with the princess's execution, allowed them to turn the tide. Enemy ships collided with debris fields, miscalculated trajectories, or were outmaneuvered by unexpected maneuvers. By the end, the coalition's forces were forced to retreat, battered and disorganized. As the dust settled, the princess looked at the human prince with a mixture of pride and realization. You have done more than survive. You have led, adapted, and inspired. The galaxy has begun to see what humans can achieve. The prince felt the weight of her words. He had not sought power, fame, or glory. He had only acted with courage, intelligence, and care. And yet, those actions had changed the course of events in ways he had never imagined. Humanity was no longer just a participant in galactic politics. It was a force that could not be ignored. Together, they continued their journey, knowing that challenges would only grow larger, dangers more complex, and decisions more consequential. Yet they also knew that with trust, courage, and ingenuity, they could face whatever the galaxy sent their way. And in that knowledge, they found strength, hope, and the unspoken understanding that the future was theirs to shape. The galaxy had changed. Where once humans had been seen as minor players, observers on the edge of politics and trade, they were now a force that could no longer be ignored. The human prince and the alien princess had survived attacks, navigated betrayal, and inspired allies. But the coalition, though battered, had not been defeated. Now, they gathered one final force, determined to crush what they saw as a dangerous symbol of change before it could grow too powerful. The prince sat in the cruiser's command room, staring at the holographic projection of the galaxy before him. The coalition's fleet was enormous, a moving wall of firepower stretching across several systems. Each ship was a potential threat, each maneuver a test. He felt the weight of responsibility like never before. For days, he had studied their movements, predicted their patterns, and calculated possibilities. Now, there was no room for error. The princess stood beside him, calm and deliberate as always. Her hand rested on the console, ready to execute commands. She had planned for this moment, but even she could not ignore the tension in the prince's expression. He was young, and the enormity of leadership was new, yet he faced it with a determination that had grown stronger with every challenge. "We cannot run this time," he said, voice steady. "If we flee, the coalition will follow, strike again, and more systems will fall into their hands. We have to show them that change is possible, that courage and intelligence can overcome force." The princess nodded. "Then we fight, and we fight smart. But we also fight for more than survival. We fight for hope, for the people who believe in us, for those who cannot fight themselves." Their plan was audacious. Instead of hiding or fleeing, they would draw the coalition into a trap. The human prince had analyzed the fleet's strategy and found a pattern. They relied on speed and overwhelming force, assuming their enemies would panic. He proposed using that confidence against them, turning their strength into a weakness. The cruiser, small but agile, moved to a central position near a dense asteroid field. The coalition's ships detected them and moved to intercept, confident of victory. The prince and the princess coordinated with allied fleets, positioning them in hidden sectors, using the natural cover of gravity wells and asteroid belts. Every maneuver relied on timing, precision, and the cooperation of allies spread across multiple systems. As the enemy fleet approached, the prince monitored every variable. He calculated trajectories, predicted enemy reactions, and adjusted plans in real time. The princess executed the strategy flawlessly, sending messages, directing allies, and ensuring the cruiser remained the central point of command. The coalition moved as expected, drawn into the trap by their own assumptions. Then the battle began. The coalition's fleet fired first, weapons streaking through space like lightning. The cruiser's shields held, energy-deflecting blasts, while smaller allied ships harassed the enemy's flanks. The prince had anticipated the first wave, but the chaos of battle still tested nerves. "Left flank, take position," the prince called, pointing at the holographic display. "Use the gravity wells, force them to split." The princess relayed the commands with authority, her calm voice steadying every allied captain who received it. The fleet responded with precision. Ships moved in coordinated arcs, weaving through the asteroid field, luring the enemy into narrow channels where their numbers became a disadvantage. For hours, the battle raged. The coalition was powerful but predictable in their tactics. Each maneuver the prince suggested, each adjustment the princess executed, exploited weaknesses in their formation. Enemy ships collided with asteroids, fired on each other by mistake, or were trapped in gravitational loops. Every small victory shifted momentum further in favor of the prince and princess. During a critical moment, a massive frigate broke through the asteroid cover, aiming directly at the cruiser. The prince quickly calculated an intercept trajectory. "We cannot outrun it," he said. "But we can force it into the gravity well. Prepare the diversion pods." The princess nodded. Diversion pods, small human-designed drones, launched from the cruiser and emitted energy signatures that mimicked a larger ship. The frigate, detecting what it thought was a massive vessel, followed the false trail. It crashed into a nearby asteroid, shields overloaded and systems failing. "That's the way we win," the prince said, voice calm despite the tension. "One calculated risk at a time. Force them to make mistakes." The Allied fleet pressed the advantage. Systems that had been neutral, inspired by the courage of the prince and princess, joined the fight, providing supplies, reinforcements, and critical intelligence. The coalition, confident in their power, found themselves trapped in a web of strategy, improvisation, and relentless pressure. As the battle reached its climax, the prince realized that victory depended not only on tactics but on morale. The coalition's ships were massive and intimidating, but their crews were human, or alien, like anyone else. Confidence could be broken and fear could spread. The prince took a risk that few would dare. He transmitted a broadcast across the coalition's communication networks, a simple, clear message. "You face not only ships but courage, intelligence, and the determination to protect lives," he said. "We do not fight for conquest, for greed, or for power. We fight for hope, for justice, and for the freedom to make our own choices. You may have strength, but we have unity and resolve." The message spread like wildfire. Allied forces amplified it, and even neutral systems intercepted it. The coalition crews, seeing the unexpected unity and intelligence of the human-led forces, began to hesitate. Confusion spread. Orders conflicted. Some ships slowed, some fired at wrong targets, and some retreated altogether. The prince and princess seized the moment. Coordinating perfectly, they struck the remaining forces with precision. Ships were disabled, captured, or forced to surrender. The battlefield shifted from chaos to control, the tide firmly in favor of the human and alien allies. When the last coalition vessel withdrew, battered and broken, silence fell over the space around the asteroid field. The prince and princess hovered together in the cruiser, surrounded by allies, both exhausted and exhilarated. For the first time, the full magnitude of their achievement became clear. They had not only survived, they had changed the course of events in the galaxy. The princess looked at the human prince, pride and awe in her eyes. "You have done more than anyone imagined. You have shown the galaxy what courage and intelligence can achieve. Humans are no longer underestimated." The prince shook his head. "I did not do it alone. You led, you protected, you trusted. We worked together, and that made all the difference." Their victory had consequences beyond the battlefield. The coalition's failure shifted political alliances. Systems that had been uncertain chose sides, inspired by the courage of the princess and the prince. Neutral worlds opened communication, offering trade, protection, and cooperation. Across the galaxy, humans gained a reputation not as weak newcomers, but as a species capable of leadership, ingenuity, and bravery. In the following weeks, the prince and princess visited key systems, not as conquerors, but as diplomats, leaders, and symbols of hope. They negotiated treaties, coordinated defenses, and encouraged cooperation among previously rival factions. Everywhere they went, they were met with respect, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Humans and aliens alike began to see the value of partnership, courage, and intelligence over mere force or tradition. During a quiet moment aboard the cruiser, the prince reflected on the journey. He had started as a young diplomat, underestimated and dismissed, thrust into a galaxy of intrigue, betrayal, and danger. He had faced threats far beyond anything he had imagined. Yet through ingenuity, courage, and cooperation with the princess, he had not only survived but transformed perceptions of humanity. The princess stood beside him, watching distant stars flicker past the viewport. "The galaxy will not be the same again," she said softly. "We have shown that courage, intelligence, and trust can change the course of history. That is a legacy worth protecting." The prince nodded. "And it is only the beginning. Humans are still young, still learning, but now the galaxy has seen what we can do. That changes everything." Together, they planned for the future. They would continue to protect systems, support allies, and challenge those who sought to impose fear or domination. Their actions had shown that change was possible, that courage could ripple farther than weapons, and that intelligence, cooperation, and empathy were forces to be reckoned with. The galaxy had taken sides, but it was not just about humans or aliens. It was about the principles that the prince and princess represented: bravery, creativity, fairness, and hope. Their journey had inspired countless others, encouraging species across the stars to act with courage, to take risks for what was right, and to recognize that strength came in many forms, not only in weapons, fleets, or status, but in choice, action, and the willingness to do what others would not. The human prince looked at the princess, realizing that their bond was no longer just strategic. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences in the crucible of danger. Together, they had reshaped the galaxy's perception of humanity, and together they would continue to lead, inspire, and protect. As they traveled from system to system, rebuilding alliances and encouraging cooperation, the stars themselves seemed to shine differently. The galaxy had seen the power of unity and courage, and the story of the human prince and the alien princess became a beacon across countless worlds. Their names were spoken not with fear, not with doubt, but with admiration and hope. For the human prince, the journey had transformed him from a diplomat into a leader, a strategist, and a symbol. For the princess, it had reinforced the value of trust, courage, and vision in leadership. And for the galaxy, it had revealed that even a young species, underestimated and new, could shape events, challenge the old order, and inspire change that would echo for generations. The human prince and the alien princess had survived, triumphed, and transformed the galaxy. The battle was won, but more importantly, a new era had begun. One in which courage, ingenuity, and collaboration were recognized as true power, and one in which humans were no longer just observers but active, respected participants in the fate of the stars. And as they looked toward the endless expanse of space, both knew that the galaxy was watching, learning, and, most importantly, hopeful. When the princess protected a human prince, the galaxy took sides.